Why weed is really illegal. They told you weed was dangerous, that it destroyed your brain cells, that it was a gateway drug. But what if the real reason it's illegal has nothing to do with your health and everything to do with power? Because the truth is, marijuana didn't become illegal because it was harmful. It became illegal because it was powerful. Too powerful to control, too natural to patent, and too threatening to the industries that already own the system. You've been lied to for almost 100 years. The war on weed was never about weed, it was about keeping people in line and making sure the money kept flowing to the right hands. This is the story they never wanted you to hear. This is the truth about why weed is really illegal. The racist roots of criminalization. It started in the 1930s when a man named Harry Anslinger became the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. He needed a villain, something to justify the growing power of his agency, and he found it in cannabis. But instead of going after it with facts, he used fear. He linked cannabis to Mexican immigrants in black communities, fueling public hysteria with headlines that claimed it made people violent, insane, and sexually aggressive. It had nothing to do with science. It was about control. Anslinger once said, "Reefer makes darkies think they're as good as white men." That wasn't a mistake. That was the strategy. Marijuana became the perfect tool for criminalizing communities of color while feeding a false narrative to the American public. The media helped him push the agenda with films like Reefer Madness, designed to terrify the public into compliance. By 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act effectively banned cannabis, not because it was killing people, but because it served a purpose: social control disguised as public safety. Cannabis wasn't just targeted for its psychoactive effects. Its cousin hemp was one of the most versatile plants on earth, and that was a problem for powerful industries. Hemp could be used to make paper, rope, textiles, biodegradable plastics, fuel, even building materials. It was fast-growing, renewable, and required fewer chemicals than traditional crops. But in the 1930s, hemp posed a direct threat to several major corporations. DuPont, which had just patented nylon and was heavily invested in petrochemicals. William Randolph Hearst, who owned vast timber holdings and controlled a massive newspaper empire. The paper and cotton industries, both of which saw hemp as a cheaper, more efficient competitor. So what did they do? They helped push the anti-marijuana agenda. Hearst newspapers ran sensationalized stories linking cannabis to crime and violence. DuPont lobbied behind the scenes. And Anslinger gave them the perfect cover, framing hemp and marijuana as the same dangerous drug. It worked. The 1937 Marijuana Tax Act didn't just criminalize cannabis, it crippled the hemp industry in the U.S. for nearly a century. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was disruptive. Why Big Pharma didn't want weed legalized. In modern times, the resistance to legal weed hasn't just come from politicians or law enforcement. It's come from one of the most powerful forces in America, the pharmaceutical industry. Why? Because cannabis is a natural plant, and natural plants can't be patented in their raw form. That means pharmaceutical companies can't fully control or profit from it like they can with synthetic drugs. And the bigger issue? Cannabis works. Studies have shown it can help with chronic pain, nausea and vomiting from chemotherapy, epileptic seizures, anxiety and PTSD, inflammation, sleep disorders. Instead of one prescription for pain, one for anxiety, and another for sleep, cannabis can potentially replace all three. And that's bad for business. A 2016 study in Health Affairs found that in states with legal medical marijuana, prescription drug use drops significantly, especially for conditions where cannabis is a known alternative. That meant billions in lost revenue for drug companies. So it's no surprise that many pharmaceutical companies have lobbied against marijuana legalization, while at the same time trying to patent synthetic versions of cannabis compounds they can control. It's not about safety, it's about monopoly. The truth about the war on drugs. By the 1970s, marijuana had already been outlawed for decades. But under President Richard Nixon, it became part of something much bigger, the war on drugs. In 1970, Nixon signed the Controlled Substances Act, classifying marijuana as a schedule, a drug the government's most dangerous category. That put it on the same level as heroin, higher than cocaine and meth. And it wasn't based on science. Nixon's own appointed commission, the Schaefer Commission, recommended that marijuana not be criminalized. But he ignored their findings. Years later, Nixon's former domestic policy chief, John Ehrlichman, admitted the truth. In a 1994 interview, he said, "The Nixon campaign in 1968 had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. We couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin, we could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings." The war on drugs wasn't about protecting public health. It was a political weapon used to justify mass surveillance, militarized policing, and the targeting of marginalized communities. And marijuana, it was just the easiest tool in the toolbox. Mass incarceration and profiting from illegal weed. After the war on drugs was launched, arrests for marijuana possession skyrocketed. Even though cannabis use was widespread across racial groups, enforcement wasn't equal. According to the ACLU, Black Americans are nearly 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than white Americans, despite similar usage rates. From the 1980s through the 2000s, millions were arrested, often for small amounts. Entire generations were affected, losing jobs, housing, voting rights, and access to education. In many cases, people were given long prison sentences for nonviolent cannabis offenses. Meanwhile, private prison companies and law enforcement agencies profited off the system. Private prisons earned government contracts based on inmate numbers. Police departments received federal funding based on drug arrests. The prison labor system used inmates to work for pennies, generating profits while keeping them behind bars. Even as states began legalizing marijuana, thousands remained incarcerated for doing what corporations would soon profit from legally. Today, major companies and investors are building multi-billion-dollar cannabis empires, while many of the people who were punished for it still sit in prison. That's not justice, that's business. Legalization and who really benefits. In recent years, the tide has started to turn. As of 2025, 38 states have legalized marijuana for medical use, and 24 states allow recreational use. Public opinion has shifted. Nearly 7 in 10 Americans now support full legalization. But just because it's becoming legal doesn't mean it's becoming fair. The legal cannabis industry is projected to exceed $40 billion in annual revenue. But the profits aren't going to the communities that were harmed most by prohibition. Instead, it's dominated by wealthy investors, multi-state corporations, celebrities and business tycoons who never face prison time. In many states, startup costs and licensing fees for dispensaries are so high that small businesses in marginalized communities can't even get in the door. And here's the twist. In some places, people are still being arrested for weed even while it's being sold legally just blocks away. Meanwhile, the government is quietly collecting hundreds of millions in tax revenue from cannabis sales. The same system that once called it dangerous is now profiting from it, without making things right for those it targeted. Legalization didn't erase the past. It just opened the door for a new kind of control. This was never about weed. So now you know the truth. Weed wasn't made illegal because it was dangerous. It was criminalized because it was disruptive, because it was powerful, because it couldn't be patented, de-taxed, or monopolized by the system. They used fear to condition the public. They used racism to target entire communities. They used lies to protect billion-dollar industries. And then they flipped the game, legalizing it when it became profitable for them, and only them. This was never about protecting people. It was about controlling them. The same government that locked millions of people in cages for a plant is now profiting off that same plant, while justice remains unpaid. They told you they were doing it for your safety. They told you the system was fair. They told you they were upholding justice. But if you still believe this government is righteous and fair, you have no idea how deep the corruption really goes. This was just the beginning. More truth, more documentaries, more reality checks are coming. If this shook you, you're not ready for what's next. Click for the next video, because the lies run deeper than you were ever meant to see.